So it certainly doesn't set a good basis for these negotiations to succeed.
Kirk, how does this play into your market outlook? How much does the market need some kind of progress on trade, or at least no further escalation? And what does it mean for the Fed and and the economy itself?
Well, I think there are a lot of issues there. I think the market highs in the year will still be the highs at the end of the year. I think you don't change your investment outlook, but certainly any kind of restrictions on global listings or the U.S. ability to invest in China, is not good for the markets. So we'll have to see. I tend to think this is all posturing for the trade negotiations. I think there will be some deal, especially protection of intellectual property rights. And I think the big question here is what's going to happen to the dollar, because the dollar is driving a lot of this. And interestingly, the more you have trade tensions, the dollar just continues to be strong. So I think that's something to keep an eye on.
Kirk, are you saying that investors should not really be paying too close of attention to the daily headlines, at least insofar as it changes their portfolio strategies?
I think you have to look through it. I think it's very difficult to trade this. There's so much uncertainty. I think if you're betting, I would say there will be some kind of deal which will be positive, but I don't think it's going to be any kind of global macro deal that settles all the issues. And I think China is probably playing a waiting game, and we'll wait to see what happens a year from now. The other issue I would say is China has a lot of pride here. Huawei and companies like that are a source of great national pride. So there's a lot of issues here at stake.
So, Kirk, just to follow on your idea that the highs for the year are probably in, do you see significant downside risk? I mean, what plays into this idea that maybe the market is going to be capped here?
Well, I don't think the market can go down too much here. The U.S. economy is strong. On the other hand, I think it's hard to argue that rates are going to go up. That the market's going to go up. I think you have to worry about interest rates going up, and you have to worry, what's going to happen in terms of our multinationals with a strong dollar. So I think it's going to be very hard for companies to continue to put up the earnings growth that they've put up, and that therefore I think the July highs are where we're going to end the year.
And Ishwar, just finally, we did get some economic numbers out of China overnight that were a little bit better than expected. How does the current path of the Chinese economy play into all this?
The Chinese economy is certainly slowing down, but it's obvious that the Chinese government is hardly in panic mode. And there are some indicators that have come in somewhat more positive than expected. There has been some fiscal and monetary stimulus, some tax cuts, a small interest rate that the government has put in place. But they have a lot of room in reserve with both monetary and fiscal stimulus. So they seem to be quite confident they can ride this through. And if the economy starts slowing down, they have a lot of room to boost up the economy with macroeconomic stimulus.
Hey, Ishwar, we've been awaiting the 70th anniversary of the modern government for a while. The argument's been out there that given the level of pride in China regarding that date, that it makes Xi less likely to want to appear to be giving in to anything. Is that overstated?
I think certainly the Chinese are not willing to be pushed around anymore. The anniversary plays into it in some significant way, I suspect, but the overall issue is that China does not feel that it's going to make concessions and that it has to make concessions in order to keep its economy going. It hurts the economy if the trade war continues, but they're not going to bend over and make all the concessions that the U.S. seems to want from the Chinese side.
Seems not. Ishwar, Kirk, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, the Fed coming off a big test in its efforts to calm the short-term funding market. Dom Chu joins us now with the latest on the Fed's repo operations. Hi, Dom.
All right, so Courtney, the biggest banks in America tapped the New York Federal Reserve for $63.5 billion worth of overnight cash borrowing via the repurchase or repo market. That was earlier this morning. The Fed would have allowed up to $100 billion of those loans, so the offering was securing overnight cash, and it was undersubscribed. Now, one of the more positive interpretations of this is that there isn't as much of a pressing need to access Fed cash as there has been in recent weeks, meaning ultra short-term interest rates have now stabilized. Now, it was a closely watched money market operation this morning, given that surge, as you can see there, in overnight borrowing rates that occurred earlier in the month. Some had said that the surge in rates could signal the early stages of a possible credit event that could lead to a broader market downturn. The Federal Reserve itself then stepped in to supply cash to the system through overnight and 2-week term repurchase agreements or repo agreements to make sure that the financial system was adequately supplied with cash. The bottom line here, folks, is that it worked. There is a consensus, though, building up that one of the reasons for the spike in those rates had to do with the unintended consequences of the Fed's efforts to boost cash in the system in the wake of the financial crisis a decade ago. You mix that with new bank regulatory requirements on capital. You mix that with seasonal demands for cash by big bank clients, and you get what we saw. The bank-to-bank lending market plays a mission-critical role in the way our financial markets operate, but up until now, it's only really been talked about by those in the cash and collateral trading businesses and money market circles. It is now fair to say that much of Wall Street is now paying a lot of attention to those money markets as a possible indicator for any kind of potential systemic stress in the future. So, Carl, those rates, very key for right now. They are stable. We'll send things back over to you.
Hey, Dom, given that today is the last day of the quarter, I mean, is there a sense out there that, you know, this has been taken care of? There was a lot of anxiety that quarter end would be a bit of a flare-up moment for this market.
That's exactly right, Mike. And so there was this kind of overnight operation put into place today. But remember also, throughout the course of the past couple of weeks, we have seen a string of these overnight operations. And then we even saw a 2-week operation happen over the course of the last week or so. So the idea there was that between these multiple overnight one-day operations and one where you had longer terms that would carry you into October, that you could see some of those funding stresses alleviated. And we have seen that. And one of the trends that we will point to is that over the course of the last week and a half, guys, we have seen the use of these Fed credit lines for these repurchase agreements used less and less, undersubscribed, so to speak. So it may indicate that the bank-to-bank lending market is taking over where the Fed would have been. So that's probably a good sign for some out there, guys.
Yeah, we'll see what happens after the 10th of October. Dom, thank you. Dominic Chu. When we come back, the vaping backlash, the latest regulatory pressures, and where the industry goes from here. Later on, we're going to hear from Heyman Capital's Kyle Bass on those potential China investment limits. Does he really think that's going to happen? Dow's up 86 points on this Monday. Last day of the quarter. More Squawk on the Street in a moment.
So what's your biggest challenge?
The pace. It's always changing.
Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October. This means that travelling to the EU will change. You'll need to check online if your passport is valid for travel to Europe. If you're planning on driving, you'll need to check if you have the right documents to drive. And make sure your travel insurance covers all your healthcare needs. To keep your trip on track, check what you need to do at gov.uk/Brexit. Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October.
Jamie Theakston and Amanda Holden.
On breakfast.
Tom Hanks is our special guest.
You're either being punished or rewarded. I'll let you decide.
I did do a whole show of grease on my front lawn when I was a kid. We charged everyone 10p. We raised a £5 and I gave it to Bishop's Waltham Gymnastics Club towards a new crash mat.
Do they get the crash mat?
I mean, it took a couple more years, but yeah.
It does happen to normal people like you. You've won £20,000. Well done.
I love this game.
Breakfast
with Jamie Theakston and Amanda Holden. Weekdays from 6:30. Listen on your radio, global player, or smart speaker.
Play Heart. The relaxing sound of fresh, cold running water. And you can have it in your kitchen. With amazing savings on Samsung fridge freezers at Currys PC World. Like the RB31 with its chilled water dispenser for only $3.99. Or upgrade to the Samsung RS8000 American-style fridge freezer with water and ice dispenser. A huge 609 litres of storage space. At just $104.9. How relaxing. At Currys PC World. Energy rating A+. T's and C's apply.
Want to know what's happening in right now? The latest headlines are just a tap away with Fox News Talk on TuneIn. When news breaks, get up-to-the-minute coverage on developing stories from around the world. Plus, hear all the Fox shows you watch on your TV. Listen to Fox News Talk around the clock on TuneIn.
Hi, this is Brian Weber, host of NFL First and Goal every Sunday, kicking off at 1 Eastern only on TuneIn Premium. Be sure to listen this Sunday for the ultimate football fan experience, featuring 7 hours of commercial-free coverage of every scoring play around the NFL.
A lot of people aren't aware that TuneIn lets you listen to the same terrestrial stations that you pick up on your FM AM dial, except you can hear them from anywhere. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Well, the e-cig crackdown continues this week as the CDC continues to investigate vaping-related lung injury cases. There are 805 cases currently open with at least 13 reported deaths. Matt Hawkins from Cresco Capital Partners and Jefferies Owen Bennett join us now to discuss the regulations and what investors should know. Owen, we'll start with you. I have to say, very few of these headlines are positive when you look at a company like Juul. Is there a possibility that all Juul products could be removed? And what's the ultimate risk to a company like Altria then, who has a 35% stake?
Yeah, I mean, the issue at the moment in the US is a lack of regulation or ineffective regulation, both in nicotine and in cannabis. And I mean, if you look somewhere like the UK, where they've implemented regulation since 2016, we're not seeing the issues you're seeing in the US. And one of the big issues, obviously, dual teenage usage. And given what they're bringing into action now with the PMTA regulatory pathway, there does appear a real risk that not only Juul's flavours are removed from the market, but also all their products, given that one of the requirements of a PMTA is unintended consequences, that being teenage usage. How would that play then into Altria? Obviously, that's a big negative, given their stake. They've given up, well, basically they stopped selling their entire vapor portfolio. But then the other names across the space, that would be a positive, because one of the things weighing on the tobacco sector at the moment is fears that the oligopoly is no longer. Barriers to entry have come down, and regulation actually supports that. And so a lot of these other products on the market, like Juul, and over these other flavoured products, a lot of these things where the FDA don't know what's actually on the market, they'll have to come off the market, which supports big tobacco in the long term.
And Matt, what are your thoughts on regulation? Obviously, Cresco just launched the largest cannabis-only PE fund, so it seems to me that you're interested in regulation for the legal products to make sure that those are the ones that consumers are buying. Is that the answer here, more regulation?
Absolutely. There's no doubt that if the United States would get more involved on the regulatory side of this, then the illicit market would be tamped down, not only just on the regulatory side, but also on the taxation side. Right now, there is a huge difference in some states to where the illicit market can thrive because the taxation in the states is too high. I think with a federal regulatory climate that includes some, altering of the taxation programs in some of these legalized states, we would get rid of the illegal market, which is where all on the cannabis side, where all this trouble is occurring. And the legalized vaping products on the cannabis side, these are closed loop systems that use terpenes as the cutting agent, not the awful things like such solvents as vitamin E acetate that this y'all mentioned dank earlier, which is this illicit product that's been on the streets, and we just have to address it.
Is Altria's playbook to introduce IQOS in the States and do regulation the right way? And then can it coexist with a Juul product at all? Or is it going to be all IQOS from here on out, as far as Altria is concerned?
Well, I mean, there's two elements to that. I think in the long run, it's probably better for Altria should IQOS prove successful, given that they probably have more of the economics around that. I mean, we don't know what the license fee is, but it's likely to be more than 35% of Juul. Secondly, I guess linked to that, though, is a big question mark. Will heated tobacco work in the US? I mean, other markets globally where it's gone up against an established reduced risk market such as vapor, heated tobacco hasn't had much traction. And the other things you need to consider in the US is the nicotine strengths. So, I mean, the average nicotine strength in cigarettes in the US is around 1.1 milligrams. The nicotine hit you get off heated tobacco is generally not that impressive. So it does well in a market like Japan where nicotine strengths are around 0.4. Maybe they'll do well in Europe where nicotine strengths are around 0.6. But will it satisfy a US tobacco consumer given those differences in nicotine hit?
You know, Matt, obviously there's been a lot of criticism about some of these illnesses potentially being related to THC that was perhaps bought illegally. So if you are a cannabis company and you're operating within the legal ramifications, what should you be doing? What message should you be getting out to the market?
Exactly what I just said. I mean, the pushing for further regulatory efforts by the federal government, pushing the fact that your products are safe, and that really is the message. There's a clear difference between the cannabis problem and the nicotine problem. I think you're going to start seeing a lot of different delivery mechanisms and form factors come into play on the cannabis side. I mean, who knows? There could be an IQOS type product on the cannabis side too. That's the heat not burn aspect, and again that gives us something to be excited about on the industry side of the cannabis industry, because there are a lot of different ways you can deliver the product as opposed to the unfortunate side of the nicotine, where it seems to be just there's one route and one route only.
Finally, on e-cigarettes, we saw the Walmart category go away, right? Do you expect a convenience store chain to follow suit, and would that be even more detrimental to Juul's distribution?
Potentially. You could see more stores do this until the FDA have got all these products off the market, they've gone through a proper regulatory pathway, and then they'll probably allow them back on. But, if that does happen, then yes, it would impact Juul, arguably less so than some of the others right now, because they pulled a lot of their flavours from convenience stores anyway ahead of the time, because obviously they wanted to try and get in the FDA's favour in terms of when they were putting their applications in.
Matt, Owen, thank you very much for being here with us today to talk about this topic that we will continue to discuss.
Thank you.
Still to come this morning, don't miss an exclusive interview with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell as he pushes the House to pass the USMCA. More Squawk on the Street when we return.
Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October. Find out what you need to do to prepare at gov.uk/Brexit.
Jamie Theakston and Amanda Holden.
Hard breakfast.
Tom Hanks is our special guest.
You're either being punished or rewarded. I'll let you decide.
I did do a whole show of grease on my front lawn when I was a kid. We charged everyone 10p. We raised a fiver, and I gave it to Bishop's Waltham Gymnastics Club towards a new crash mat.
Do they get the crash mat?
It took a couple more years, but yeah.
It does happen to normal people like you. You've won £20,000. Well done.
I love this game.
Breakfast
With Jamie Theakston and Amanda Holden. Weekdays from 6:30. Listen on your radio, global player, or smart speaker.
Play hard.
Wow, that was the most beautiful bit of film I've ever seen. What performances! Did you see the pups' faces? They loved it. But such emotion, such intensity.
Sergey, it was an advert for snacks.
I don't remember the last time I felt so moved.
Oh, boy. Oh. Enjoy more time together with 2-for-1 cinema tickets from Meerkat Movies with the Meerkat app. When you buy, so compare the market. Qualifying purchase. Chooses Wednesdays only. Participating cinemas. T's and C's apply.
Hey, NFL fans. Can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you have unlimited access to every team and every game in the league. Listen live as it happens or on demand. Anytime, anywhere. All season long. Search NFL today.
What if you could keep up with cable news even when you're on the go? With TuneIn Premium, you can listen to MSNBC Live without any commercial interruptions. All of the news, none of the ads. Listen live on TuneIn Premium today.
MSNBC is on TuneIn. Get up-to-the-minute coverage on news and events from around the world with MSNBC's live 24/7 station on TuneIn. At home or on the go, stay up to date on the latest news and political trends with MSNBC's full lineup of shows, including Hardball with Chris Matthews.
Hi, I'm Chris Matthews. Thanks for listening to MSNBC on TuneIn.
And The Rachel Maddow Show. Plus, when news breaks, MSNBC has you covered with live updates, expert analysis, and more. Search MSNBC on TuneIn today.
ESPN Radio and TuneIn just go hand in hand. Hi, this is Mel Kiper Jr. reminding you that all of your favorite ESPN radio shows and events are right here on TuneIn. Just search ESPN Radio to begin enjoying today.
TuneIn puts you on the sideline for the 2019 college football season free all year long. With college football on TuneIn, hear the home and away call for more than 140 schools live, regular season matchups and rivalry games, conference championships and bowl games, the college football playoff.
Throw it. He's got it on stiff arm. End zone. Touchdown.
You can listen to it all for free at home, on campus, or on the road. Hear the excitement and pageantry of college football all season long, free on TuneIn.
The GM strike is heading into the third week with losses mounting and now suppliers feeling the pain. Our Phil LeBeau joins us now with the latest. Morning, Phil.
Carl, day 15, the negotiators for the UAW and General Motors back at the table this morning, though we get no indication that they're expected to announce a deal anytime soon. As this strike enters the third week, RBC Capital is out with a note saying when you look at the financial impact for General Motors, it is the estimate of RBC Capital that it's now $75 to $100 million per day. At the beginning of the strike, they said, well, we think it's going to be about $50 million a day. In the note, Joseph Spack, the analyst, writes, we are getting to the point where it will be difficult to recover the lost production this year. And the big concern is with suppliers. We're talking about American Axle, Lear, Tenneco. Look at these stocks since the strike began. They're all down anywhere between 10 and 15%. As for General Motors, if you take a look at that stock since the strike began, really hasn't been a whole lot of reaction. Remember, they've got plenty of supply. The dealers are going to be okay, at least for a couple more weeks. I think if you go 2-3 weeks more and this strike has not been resolved, then you might start to see shares of General Motors really feel some pressure.
Phil, we have seen some stories saying that the big issues are at the main table, so to speak, suggesting that they could put this to bed relatively soon. Do you believe it?
No. And when those stories first started coming out last week, yeah, they're at the main table. But if you talk with people who are familiar with the negotiations, you get no sense that they're close to a deal. It wasn't imminent last week. It wasn't imminent over the weekend. Now, could they reach an agreement over the next couple of days, Carl? Sure, that's possible. But the big issue here, job guarantees, which is what the UAW wants, versus temporary workers, which is what General Motors wants. And remember, GM thinks the temporary workers are crucial for when they ramp up production and they need to hire more people and when they bring down production, which is always a possibility in this market. And that's at the heart of the issues between General Motors and the union.
Thank you, Phil LeBeau. So it looks like we could have a ways to go before this is resolved. GM shares down about 1%. Now for our ETF Spotlight, taking a look at retail with the XRT moving higher and about to wrap up a strong September, more than 6% so far this month. Target is one of the group's top holdings and among the S&P 500's biggest gainers in the third quarter, surging by more than 23%. Higher by about 1% today. On the opposite end, you have Forever 21 filing for bankruptcy. This could be a big one. They have more than 800 stores. They're looking to potentially close up to 178 in the U.S. So they say they're not going to exit any major markets. It's about 2% of Simon's base minimum rent. So it makes it the sixth largest tenant outside of department stores, and about 1.4% of Brookfield GDP's base minimum rent. So it's substantial. It's a private company. We don't talk about it that much, but it has had an interesting impact on the world of fast fashion. It drove prices lower, I think, in a lot of cases. You can buy, tops in some cases for as little as $5 and $7 there. So it's been a very interesting play in the world of fast fashion and really beyond. But more customers have gotten interested in sort of sustainable fashion and somewhat less interested in, buying these very disposable clothing, which, I'm not saying that as a negative, but that's often sort of how it's viewed. Very different, of course, than what we're seeing from some of these other staple names today. We've got Dollar Tree, we got Nike at all-time highs. But, of course, not all is well in retail. You got to play the right game at the right time.
And this is not a so-called private equity blow-up, so to speak.
No, not necessarily. Not in this case, though it is privately held. And this is a bankruptcy filing, but they are looking to reorganize, so this doesn't necessarily mean that it's going out of business. We have to clarify that, of course, that it's not a for sure liquidation, though, of course, that could be a possibility if they can't get this reorganized.
A reduced footprint, though, no matter what.
A reduced footprint, although they say they're not going to exit any major markets, but it's something that we should watch, of course, for those mall REITs as well, because it is a pretty significant tenant for Simon and for Brookfield GDP, which are among the two biggest in the country.
All right, Courtney, thanks. Let's now send it over to Sue Herrera for a CNBC News update at this hour. Good morning, Sue.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning, everyone. Here's what's happening at this hour. Officials say Somalia's Islamic extremist rebels launched 2 attacks on U.S. and European military targets. In the first attack, the Somali army says it repelled an attempt by al-Shabaab to storm a military airstrip with host Somali and U.S. forces. The second attack was by a suicide car bomber targeting Italian peacekeepers in Mogadishu. Luckily, no casualties reported. Dozens of students rallied in Hong Kong's Charter Garden Central to spread the message, 5 demands, not one less. That's their slogan. Those demands include the resignation of Chief Executive Carrie Lam and direct elections for the city's leadership. At the same time, Chinese President Xi Jinping renewed his government's commitment to allow Hong Kong to manage its own affairs. Xi made his remarks at a reception on the eve of a massive celebration of the People's Republic 70th anniversary. Here at home, snow hammering parts of northwest Montana over the weekend, bringing high winds that closed roads, downed trees, and caused scattered power outages. Up to 2 feet of snow fell in the mountains. Other western states were also hit by that storm. You are up to date. That is the news update this hour. But I think it was a snow day for a lot of kids. Carl?
It's hard to believe, Sue.
That's the upside, I guess.
I know. Sue Herrera, thanks. When we come back, Heyman Capital's Kyle Bass on all things China. When Squawk on the Street continues, Dow's up 67.
ETF Spotlight is sponsored by Invesco QQQ.
To succeed in small business, you need technology that runs efficiently. When you partner with a Dell Small Business Technology Advisor, you get advice, one-on-one partnership, and tailored productivity solutions, including computers with Intel Core processors, servers, storage, networking, plus industry-leading monitors and accessories. It's how they help your small business make the most of every minute. To speak with an advisor today, call 0800 085 4878. That's 0800 085 4878.
Searching for a more memorable short break? Fly from London Heathrow to Cork from $55.99 each way as part of a return trip with Aer Lingus. Step off the plane and into a warm welcome in Cork. Surround yourself with breathtaking coastal views, soak up the culture of Cork City, or head to the colourful town of Kinsale and indulge in the best seafood around. Smart enjoys a short break in Ireland. Smart flies, Aer Lingus. Book now at airlingus.com. Offers subject to conditions and availability.
Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October. Brexit will bring changes that affect businesses in many ways, particularly if you buy from EU suppliers, sell to EU customers, provide services to EU clients, and receive customer data from other businesses in the EU. Businesses need to prepare. Find out how at gov.uk/Brexit. Get ready for Brexit on the 31st of October.
Only on Dave. We have taken the titles of famous, intellectual, proper lectures and asked our guests to write their own versions.
I'm Ed Gamble, and I suffer from unwanted arousal. Every wrestler has got to have a good catchphrase. Wayne! And the dirt is gone.
The least harmful of lies is the white lie, because even language is very racist.
It's comedy for the brain. Comedians giving lectures Wednesdays at 10 on Dave.
Eyes are on Hong Kong once again, bracing for more protests with China's National Day just hours away now. Sherry Kang is on the ground in Hong Kong with the latest. Sherry?
Good morning, Carl. So we saw 17th straight weekend of protests and certainly a further escalation of aggression on both Hong Kong protesters calling for more democracy for Hong Kong and the police here in the city. And of course, that's certainly an ominous setup for China's National Day 70th anniversary. So certainly a special occasion for the PRC and Chinese President Xi Jinping as well. And we saw, of course, that preview of what we can expect tomorrow, marking that occasion. A lot of protesters marching despite a police ban, and also episodes of vandalism at MTR stations. Some protesters setting the entrance of subway stations on fire and vandalizing some restaurants, shops, and police officers responding with tear gas and water cannons as well. So that escalation, really the question is, how much of that escalation are we going to see tomorrow marking that occasion? Behind me, you're looking at Baohania Square, which is where Hong Kong, as one of the territories of China, is supposed to observe that occasion, celebrate that occasion tomorrow, but some elements of that celebration have been scaled down. For example, fireworks have been canceled, and we are expecting Hong Kong protesters to, quote, mourn the celebration, mourn that anniversary rather than to celebrate. In the meantime, Hong Kong police were sending out some ominous messages as well, sending text messages to Hong Kong public to basically brace themselves for severe disruptions, and calling the activities that we saw from Hong Kong protesters over the weekend something that's getting very close to, quote, terrorism. Carl, back to you.
Sherry, thank you for that. Our Sherry Kang in Hong Kong. For more on Hong Kong, on China, and these reports of the U.S. potentially weighing delisting Chinese companies from U.S. markets, we're joined this morning by Haven Capital Management's founder and chief investment officer, Kyle Bass. Kyle, welcome back. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Carl.
Quite a bit of news that we got out of Bloomberg on Friday. Obviously, Monica Crowley, Treasury spokesperson in Navarro on our air today, pushed back on that. How far do you think this went or is going, even despite the pushback?
Yeah, Carl, I think it's really important for the American public to know that Chinese companies, when they list in the U.S., said China signed a special MOU with the U.S. in 2013 that basically exempts Chinese companies from having to actually submit themselves to covered audits or be Dodd-Frank compliant. So all of the U.S. money that goes into Chinese companies, it goes into companies that don't operate under a rule of law and they don't submit themselves to audits. So imagine what kind of fraud is behind some of these companies.
So they don't deserve to be here, essentially, right? And is this being done, do you think, to protect American investors or to put some pain onto China?
Well, forget about what it's being done to do, except for the fact that what we're saying is maybe, just maybe, China should have to adhere to U.S. law if they want to raise money in the U.S. We're not saying that money can't go to China. We're not saying that Chinese companies can't list. We're simply saying that you have to submit yourself to U.S. covered audit standards and be Dodd-Frank compliant if you want U.S. investors to invest. And then think about this also. All the money that's going through the MSCI indices into China for all of the ERISA fiduciaries that invest U.S. retirees' money and even the military and government pensions into Chinese equities, maybe the U.S. money should also adhere to the same standards. They shouldn't invest in companies that don't comply with U.S. securities laws. I know that sounds crazy, Carl, but I actually think that's where we should be today.
Well, Kyle, you know, the Chinese companies have been placed inside the predominant indexes, the MSCI indexes. You have all these pension funds kind of on autopilot buying index-based investments. I mean, it seems like there's multiple stages to any process of unwinding this. And in fact, if they haven't to this point decided that these companies should be compliant by your standards, what's now the impetus to do that?
Well, let's see. So in the U.S., there are 188 listed Chinese companies listed on U.S. exchanges that have a collective market cap of $2 trillion. By 2021, if MSCI implements everything that it says it's going to implement, the U.S. investors will have over $1 trillion invested in companies that don't have a rule of law and they don't submit themselves to U.S. audits. So what I'm saying is this is not an unwind. All we're saying is let's raise Chinese company standards up to ours just so that U.S. investors are protected in the long run. This doesn't have anything to do about imposing pain on anyone. This is just looking back to 2013 and saying what we did as a country was really stupid.